On October 25th, 1983, Operation Urgent Fury commenced with 7,300 American troops overwhelming 1,300 soldiers from the tiny nation of Grenada. 2 days prior, 241 U.S. military personnel were killed by a suicide bomber in Lebanon. The Reagan administration claimed there was no connection between the two events. On December 16, 1998, President William Clinton ordered airstrikes on what turned out to be a pharmaceutical factory in Iraq. 5 days earlier, the House Judiciary Committee voted to approve 4 articles of impeachment over Clinton's involvement with Monica Lewinsky and the Paula Jones scandals. Clinton's predecessor, H.W. Bush, was experiencing sinking popularity numbers after reneging on his read my lips promises not to raise taxes. It was then he decided that 2 wars, in Panama and later in Kuwait and Iraq, were required to buttress his diminishing popularity. Military action to distract from presidential failings? Is that a normal thing now?
Welcome to this latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name's Paul Thomas.
In part 1 of a 2-part series of Wagging the Dog, Paul is joined by Lenny Young.
Are the bombings and kidnappings in Venezuela, the pirating of oil tankers on the high seas, missile strikes on the cocaine boats in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific, ICE attacks on unarmed domestic residents in America, threats to take over Cuba, Mexico, Greenland, Canada, Colombia, and now carrier task forces threatening Iran. Are these a sophisticated strategy by the Trump regime to use violence to distract attention from the uncontrolled inflation, skyrocketing healthcare insurance premiums, the Epstein cover-up? Lenny, what do you think?
Well, I think some of these fall into different categories, right? And I think the simple thing is I feel like we might be giving Trump a little bit too much credit. I think for Trump, he enjoys wielding power, and the thing that the president can wield the most power in is in foreign affairs. So things like
Now, do you say
all,
that because he's running into some obstacles domestically?
yeah, I have a feeling he's figuring out that making changes to things like the cost of goods and services is really hard and requires a lot of cooperation. But like blowing up a couple of boats does not require a lot of cooperation. So I think he is doing the things that are easy and the things that net him the most power, and that kind of burnish his image as a strong man. It's no secret that he admires other strong men around the world, so it's an easy way for him to be able to make him. I mean, I'm not inside his head, but it definitely makes him probably feel like a strong man when he can just bomb civilian boats in the Caribbean Sea or kidnap the sitting president of Venezuela in the middle of the night.
No, there's no sophistication to this. This is just a simple man doing simple things because they're easy to do.
Right, and I would think that his international shenanigans are a little bit different from all of the domestic stuff that we're dealing with here in American cities. That I think is Trump just kind of following the wishes and desires of his closest advisors. And it's telling that when things got a little too hairy and especially Republican governors told him that the violence on the streets of American cities was getting too bad and that it needed to stop, or the midterms would really, really not go the Republicans' way at all. He was convinced to stop. I think he is very much worried about his public image. But again, he feels like he can do much more in the international arena and be much more of a bully because there's not much pushback, and the pushback that happens does not have certainly either legislative or legal teeth behind it.
So it's just a bully doing bullying things.
I think so. Yeah, I don't think this is a real sophisticated strategy. I think he goes for the things that are easy wins. I really think that he seems to be the kind of president that enjoys the idea of being the president much more than the act of actually being the president, right? The things that seem to be the most important to him are looking good, being in front of people who will praise him, looking at his built legacy around the Capitol. Yeah, I think those are the things that he loves being adored, and he does not like being criticized.
Okay. Now, Hitler threatened to remilitarize the Rhineland. Then he did. Threatened Austria. Then he took it. Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia were pretty easy after Chamberlain declared peace in our time. When Poland decided not to go down without a fight, that decision resulted in World War II. Now, with Trump, do we see a man who sees any limitations to his power? And should his threats to take Colombia, Greenland, Cuba, Iran, and Canada be taken seriously or not?
I think if you had asked me that question before the kidnapping of Maduro, I would have said no. It's ridiculous, right? Like even he knows that there's a limit to this kind of bellicose rhetoric.
So his progression of aggression has caused you to rethink what you thought earlier.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if not to like, I really don't think like he will like occupy, for instance, Greenland or Colombia or Iran or Cuba. Again, these are things that kind of get whispered in his ear by his closest associates, right? I'm sure like Marco Rubio was very much interested in, in the fall of Maduro and is interested in toppling the government in Cuba. It's very interesting that we're kind of all up in Iran's business when, the president had originally sidelined um, Bolton, who had actually been wanting for many years to decapitate the Iranian regime. I have a feeling like, again, this is the kind of thing where he knows that he can bully like smaller countries and smaller constituents. But if, for instance, if he attacks Iran, Iran has, tens of millions of people in it. Canada, of course, a huge country. Um, the idea of actually wanting to take Greenland when the simple truth is that the United States already has a military presence in Greenland, and the the government of Greenland was more than willing to make all sorts of deals, sell minerals, those sorts of things. Again, like all of the reasons that it would seem for why this is happening are pretty easily disproved. So I think again, it really comes down to Trump's ego. Again, and it would be great for him if he could say that as the president, he expanded the footprint of the United States, right? Now, Greenland is now a part of the United States, or the Panama Canal is now a part of the United States. He really is, I think it really comes down to like his legacy. He's thinking about his legacy. And again, it's much easier to make these really outrageous statements in the international arena than making outrageous statements here in the United States and then having to back them up.
Well, as far as Greenland went, he was all big on it until Davos, and whenever the European Union decided that they were going to deploy troops, Germany, Great Britain, Canada were going to deploy troops for military exercises in Greenland. So my question to you now, Lenny, is: do you think that standing up to him by this united European front was the reason why he backed down from all the harsh rhetoric about, we need Greenland, we need to own it. We don't need to rent it. We need to own it.
Right. I think he's really relying on the fact that diplomatic norms, basically says that if you're faced with this kind of outrageous rhetoric, is to either kind of laugh it off or to kind of deflect it. And I think at a certain point, the European Union just realized that he was not going to give up on this, that he really was not diplomatic at all, that he was not really seeing reason because he was presented with a number of reasons why he would be able to get all of his alleged aims for owning Greenland just out of a treaty or even some sort of cooperation deal.
He already had all that
Of
He
course.
he wanted to have his name on. I mean, with the mineral rights, the military bases, all that they agreed to back in 1948. But
Right. And a military base that evidently is like in disrepair, rare earth minerals that nobody is really interested in drilling for because of the cost involved in drilling through all of that like ice and permafrost in order to actually get to the minerals. Um, it just all of the logic just really falls apart, right? Like wet tissue paper. And all you're really left is um he's an old man that gets like a bug in his ear about something and it will just like not let it go, even though he is told time and time again that what he thinks is happening is not happening, or what he thinks that he want is not really possible.
the violence of his military operations is not restricted to his international ambitions, although you said that he probably wants to go there because there's less resistance. He has already invaded cities with names such as Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte, Memphis, Portland, Raleigh, New Orleans, Washington, D.C. But what happened in Minneapolis is a violence way beyond the imaginations of who voted in 2024 presidential election. Has the Civil War started? Is there any way to slow this down before this November's midterms? And I don't know if you're aware, Lenny, but in our neighborhood, there's a town along the river called Oakmont, and there's a town along the river called Springdale, and ICE has already shown up in these places, and they've arrested, taken some people who live there. I don't know if they're citizens or immigrants or what they are, but there have been reports that they're in our neighborhood.
I'm sure they are.
So
Yeah,
has the Civil War started? You think?
no, I don't think so. I think people, especially like people who don't really pay attention to politics, have seen this for what it is, which is a really shocking exercise in state power. So I don't think it's necessarily a civil war or a war between like, the people with red ties and the people with blue ties. I think this is just people not recognizing the American way of life and the American governmental system and the American system of law and order that they assumed was has been in place, right, for the past 50 or 60 years. I was also very heartened by the amount of nonviolent resistance that was shown by the citizens of Minnesota in the face of like great tragedy and great pain. The networks of assistants and helpers and volunteers, right, to help escort children to and from school, to arrange for grocery deliveries for people who were afraid to leave their houses. That just that kind of neighbors taking care of neighbors activity that is really apolitical at its heart, and you would find at any sort of like city or county-wide disaster anywhere in the United States. I think a lot of people just stepped up in a way in that they saw that their neighbors were hurting and they tried to help as much as they could. I also was really heartened by the fact that you saw a lot of people protesting who, quite frankly, looked really awkward because they were not professional rabble rousers. They were not make a sign and go out and yell kind of people, but they felt helpless and they had to do something. And therefore, they put themselves literally out there in the field, right? In the field of view, no longer silent, to say that what was happening was not right and that we can hold two opinions in our head, which is that we this needs to be a nation of laws and that there needs to be an immigration system and rules that are followed, and that we also, when we enforce those laws, we can treat those people as human beings with due process.
Okay, I want to go back and narrow down one of the phrases that you used in your last answer, which was about
Sure.
the American perspective. Okay, and what you just described after you used that phrase, the American perspective, if I'm even quoting you correctly, is the kindness and generosity and the feeling of morality and what is right and doing that. But I think was another perspective that I want to ask about, and that is that we are a nation who should be run by European descendants, and anyone that is not white enough doesn't really deserve to have the kind of privilege and ownership that the white race does. And my question, I guess, is do you think that it was that attitude that is held by a number of people in America that gave Trump the emboldenedness to go ahead and push this shit that he did in these other cities, and especially in Minneapolis? Do you understand the
Yeah,
question?
yeah. I mean, I feel like Americans in general have very short memories, right? I feel like the people who feel that this is like a white nation really forget even even their own family history, right? Like it still just boggles the mind that Stephen Miller can be such a xenophobe when he's only like a second or third generation American. Like he is the grandson of immigrants. And, you know, people forget that history. People forget, how many people in their family history have come from nothing at their own peril, and because it makes them look really ridiculous. Of course, like a lot of people's intentions seem much more sinister, right? I think we've gotten used to trolling, right, over the past 10 years of people just basically saying outrageous things just to make you mad or to make you upset. Um, what I feel is the most dangerous is when there is no policing by, political groups, right or left, of the of things that are beyond the pale, right? Of attitudes or indications that, that believe quite falsely and again quite ridiculously that America is like a white nation or even a white Christian nation. Um, the people who just willfully like forget about history or choose not to think about those parts of the history that are inconvenient to their theory.
Uh, there's been a lot of talk lately. I've been hearing on the news about America really didn't become a multicultural nation until 1965 with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And it seems to me that what has happened in the past year with all the ending of the DEI and all that is that we were really trying to erase that whole idea. They actually wanted to take Jackie Robinson off the list of great American heroes. So do you think that that idea that we can erase what achievements that were made uh, up to 1965 has any weight in staying, or do you think the American people are going to stand back against that, fight back?
I Yeah, I I really do believe that. I feel like, now that, everybody with a camera and an Instagram account has a forum for themselves, right? It's like the ultimate revenge of pamphleteering, like from a time during the colonial period where we actually had the greatest percentage of literacy in this country. I feel like yes, I don't think people will stand for that. And even people with a short sense of history, there have been many groups of people who have been the out group here in the United States, right? Most painfully, of course, like Native Americans, who are still quite invisible to most people in this country. Uh, you know, uh, and then including like Chinese citizens, Italian and Irish citizens, Catholics in general, Japanese internment during World War II, right? The influx of Eastern Europeans and Jews in the later part of the 19th century. There have always been these outgroups that have arrived, but eventually they have been assimilated, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have been a country where assimilation has been the norm for over a century. Yeah, more so than even in other European countries. There's been this assumption that if you jump through all the hoops, and you pledge your allegiance to this flag, you are an American. Uh, yeah, I don't think this will stand, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we as Americans lead very circumscribed lives where we really don't meet anybody who is not like us. I mean, demographic patterns show this that like people have started to sort themselves based on class and based on race in the neighborhoods that they live in. And for the most part, like a lot of that, because the things that we don't know, it is easier for us to fear. Things that we do not understand or things for which like we don't have an ambassador like to help to introduce those things, we tend towards fear, right? If we don't know a Muslim person, we believe that somebody's trying to institute Sharia law in the middle of Iowa, right? Because like we really don't have any like Caribbean friends. We think that like, Haitians eat dogs, and Venezuelans are all like drug dealers or like welfare cheats. And it's because we've not met regular people. I mean, it's no secret that you and I are neighbors, and I am. Uh, what I like about our neighborhood is that, people can get together, be outside, talk about their kids, their grandkids, and I don't know how they voted. I don't know what television program, what news show they watch at night. But the very fact is that, that we can get along on a neighborly level, on a personal level, I think will help us, as a nation to lower this level of fear and distrust that our phones and our media either intentionally or inadvertently stoke in us.
So you just described what has happened on our neighborhood that has successfully um, transcended this all the horrors that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Um, so is there any suggestion from you on how we can achieve something like that on a national level, as far as particular actions that could be taken where that achievement could be manifested?
I think a lot of that will have to happen in the areas in which our government can provide a check or a balance, right? I mean, on the federal level, obviously the Congress is not really going to provide that check and balance. The Supreme Court, uh, even though it gave Trump a little rebuke to his tariff regime this week, is not really going to do anything. So I think you have to look on a lower level, like the lower federal courts, which have been much more aggressive in uh, not not even just in turning away Trump's nonsense, but in really schooling a group of ill-informed and ill-prepared attorneys that have been hired to press some of these ridiculous cases that have been filed. And then we also can look to state governors and states attorneys general to help provide some sort of like counterbalance. Even say like Republican governors or Republican attorneys general, I think a lot of them see some elements that go against their own ideas of sovereignty, where especially like when Trump bafflingly or the government bafflingly went against some really precious Second Amendment chestnuts. I think a lot of, especially governors were more than willing to do some quiet back channel diplomacy, basically to tell him that he is either misinformed or incorrect in that regard.
So you think some of that is going on? Because I don't see the Florida governor or the Texas governor doing anything except getting down on their knees and bowing to their leader.
Well, I guess uh, I don't know. Discount. I tend to discount the grandstanding element of governors, right? I mean, even like, some a governor who's mostly their appeal I agree with, like Tim Walz or Gretchen Whitmer. There's times when they have to kind of grandstand and they have to kind of like, kind of be a rah-rah booster for what is going on. I think in those cases, as a good citizen, you really have to read between the lines as to what is like the showy rhetoric or the bombast or, the trolling.
Mhm.
and what is it that the governors can actually do within their power.
Okay, well, you mentioned earlier about the attorney generals and the district attorneys.
Yeah.
Do you think they're doing enough now to stop the citizens from being murdered by federal agents? For instance, let's look at Minneapolis. Moriarty is the DA there, and she seems to be putting together a case. But is she going to be able to get a grand jury to indict these guys that murdered Renee Good and Alex Preddy? Or do you think that's going to kind of like fall apart to the federal government, which clearly trying to protect these guys?
Yeah. I don't know necessarily. I know that like many Democratic attorneys general are mounting legal challenges against ICE operations, right? They're filing lawsuits against federal authorities, like in order to either slow things down or to prevent things like the construction of new detention centers, right? Like in Maryland, they're trying to slow down the construction of a detention center there. I mean, AGs in like New York and California and Maine, they've launched some DIY portals for residents to report or upload video evidence of like excessive behavior. So they've been doing some crowdsourcing or asking for citizen input on that kind of stuff. So if anything, they're trying to use the legal system to kind of like slow the roll of some of these more heinous actions, and they're also giving citizens an opportunity to crowdsource or to feel like they're like doing something to help make things better. And then, of course, like there's ideas about limiting cooperation with ICE, like Josh Shapiro has said that, that the state police, don't help ICE, even though, 4 years ago they've started doing things where the state police are able to coordinate a little bit with ICE. And again, like a lot of this is
Well, 4 years
the
ago, they were after the criminals. ICE was after criminals.
correct,
ICE is not
correct,
after criminals now. They're after easy targets.
right. I mean, like immigration enforcement in Pennsylvania, they have access to personal information that Pennsylvanians have shared with the Commonwealth. Like they have driver's license numbers, they have headshots, they have those sorts of things. But I mean, Shapiro has explicitly said that you know that he's basically limiting it to like state prison officials honoring ICE requests to temporarily hold individuals, right?
Mhm.
And allowing troopers to share limited information with ICE.
Of criminals, which is a very,
Right, right. No, and I mean Shapiro
yeah.
has really he's not hidden that fact, right?
Which
Um,
I think most Americans are okay with. Let's get the criminals. And if they've been arrested by local officials, state or local officials, then it's probably because there was good probable cause to arrest those guys. So I think we're
right.
all in favor of getting rid of those guys. And I think what happened was Obama, in his 8 years, where he was called the deporter in chief, managed to get rid of a lot of those criminals because they had actual investigations where they found these immigrants who were doing criminal activity, and they got rid of a bunch of them. Now that most of them are gone because of what Obama did, Trump's going after everybody. Everybody with
Well, it also goes back to the idea of like what is easy and what is hard,
mm-hmm,
right? For
yeah,
the US government, what is hard is doing the investigative work to find criminals, people who do not wish to be found, people who have means by which to hide themselves,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think when, you know, Stephen Miller and his goons figured out that that kind of work was actually going to be really hard, right? That's when he had that famous meeting where he said that ICE agents should be hanging out in Home Depot parking lots and in front of convenience stores, right? Like if it's too hard to get rid of the actual criminals, then just roll out the nets, and let's haul in everything and then we can pick and choose later as we wish.
Okay, how do you think the courts and the DAs and the attorney generals are doing as far as slowing this down? I know you mentioned they're using the rule of law, and I think that most of us want to go back to following the legal process. But is that going to be effective as far as stopping Stephen Miller and Trump, who are all about how effective is all this resistance? Is basically my question.
I think it's beginning to bear fruit, mainly because one, it's exposing the fact that that a lot of this the legal things that are being or the legal wise things that are being done by the Trump administration are either completely illegal and indefensible or they're incompetent, right? So they're putting things together in a slapdash way, in a way that someone could easily file a motion, for instance, like closing down Alligator Alcatraz in Florida, right? It was very easy for them to just be like, wow, you guys didn't do any kind of environmental controls on this, like, and they were, it was not done in the legal way or in a legal manner. Similarly, when rhetoric, uh, uh, when rhetoric falls up against the ability to keep your law license, right? We find that when you actually get punished for telling a lie or dissembling or not speaking in good faith, then suddenly the law tends to be on the side of truth. And we're finding that more and more with people trying to, with not being able to get grand jury indictments for Trump's enemies, right? For the using the power of the government to punish enemies turns out to be pretty flimsy material that even conservative-minded justices are not going to put up with. Um, so yeah, I think what's happening is that the incompetence of the legal theories and the incompetence of the actual lawyers themselves, the fact that they don't seem to know how to argue or to keep their facts straight or to present a cohesive case at all, like actual members of the judiciary, whether they're liberal or conservative, don't uh to put it to memify it, ain't nobody got time for that.
And it's really encouraging for me to see that these judges are willing to slap them down and say, come on, you know, do your job. And lying in my courtroom is not your job. So I'm
No,
encouraged.
and I mean, I guess it's again like, when you have life tenure or when you have like some guaranteed element, like, or if like you have the righteous assuredness that stare decisis and the rule of law and the expectations of law are on your side, then it's very easy to insist on those same principles. And it seems like, I think that the Trump administration has gotten in a lot of trouble in that, like, they have a hard time hiring attorneys to do their bidding because most attorneys read the writing on the wall and like I, I could not support that argument, right? To the point where, like, if you support an argument that you really don't believe, or you promote things that are knowingly false, that you risk losing your license and your career.
Yeah. Okay. The elephant in the room is that Trump is trying to disappear the fact that DOJ is in violation of a law that Trump just signed by releasing 50% of the documents the law requires them to release. The particular documents I want to see are the 302s, which are the FBI witness statements from the victims. I'm so tired of hearing the assertions of Trump's innocence because we've seen no evidence that implicates him. We've seen no direct evidence because he is not allowing it to be released. Do you think there is any possibility that the 50% that still is undercover contains any exculpatory evidence that exonerates Trump from having sex with underage girls? I can tell you what I think, but I'm asking what you think.
I I think I think that the people under Trump's thrall have done a very good job of kind of hopelessly muddying the water. And unfortunately, in the service of, again, of clearing their boss, they have not seen the forest for the trees. And I feel like the saddest thing here is not the whether or not like we're going to find some smoking gun that connects Trump to the horrible atrocities of Jeffrey Epstein and the very few the very few wealthy men who have a legitimate claim to being in that group. And most of those people, I think, was people have tossed around like Bill Richardson's name. Most of those people who feel like they can be directly connected to sex with underage girls are dead, including Epstein. And I feel like just in order to in order to exonerate Trump, they have just made the true quest for justice and the truth like almost impossible, right? They've released millions of documents, half-assedly redacted, not really searchable, not in any kind of order, not in any way that like somebody from the Department of Justice could actually follow a trail or collect evidence or create some sort of chain of causation or even a chain of history to be able to bring somebody to justice. They've just thrown it all out there because they know that their base wants that red meat, and they're a victim of their own success in creating this this idea of this vast Epstein conspiracy. And they know that they've got their nose up in it because when you have someone like Cash Patel or Dan Bongino turning a 180 after they get in the halls of power, just saying like, oh, no, there's nothing to see here, nothing is wrong, right? What can you conclude other than like they were full of shit before, or they realize that the truth is more than they can bear, or that the truth will affect them financially, and they just chose to stay quiet. Either way,
Or
it's pretty repulsive either way.
yeah, or the truth is that Trump actually did have sex with these underage girls, and they have to muddy this all up in order to prevent that from being exposed. The
I mean,
302, the 302 witness statements where the FBI had interviewed these victims who called them and said, "Hey, this guy did it to me while I was under Epstein's control, whether I was in New York or New Mexico or Mar-a-Lago or down in Florida or on the island." You know. Well, let me go to the next question here.
sure.
Katie Johnson is a Jane Doe name of a woman who filed a civil suit in the Central District of California in April 2016 against Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump for, quote, extreme sexual and physical abuse, including forcible rape, end quote. In 1994, when she was 13 years old, the suit was withdrawn later that year, according to Ms. Johnson's attorney, because of threats she received against her and her family. Now, NPR and other sources have reported that the number of Epstein survivors is over 1,000. To date, none have received justice, which, according to Merriam Webster, is, quote, a process or result of using laws to fairly judge cases, redress wrongs, and punish crimes, end quote. The final words in the Pledge of Allegiance are, and justice for all. Can you honestly state that justice for all exists in this republic? And if not, can you, with the same honesty, repeat the words in that oath that affirm your allegiance to this republic? If you can, please explain how that works. Now, I don't want to put you on the hot seat here. About, I don't know how often you're in a position where you have to pledge the oath of the Pledge of Allegiance. I personally decided I can no longer say that because of this republic under Donald Trump is not about justice. But basically, my question to you is how does that work?
I mean, look, we can go back to what I was talking about earlier, that we've always had an out group in this country, right? And for that out group, the out group knew that the idea of justice did not exist for them, right? It was justice for everybody else and the law for them, right? Or like compassion for me and the law for thee, yeah. So I think it's part of America that we have these amazing ideals that I think we hold in our hearts that makes us special as Americans, and we think about this great experiment in democracy that's 250 years old this year. But I think we also know that that idea of justice has been a shifting line. And I think we try to move that line towards the truth as much as possible. But the idea of justice for all, when some of these founding fathers owned other human beings, right, is a little laughable. The idea of justice for all, when a good over half of the population could not even vote until like the 1920s, and then another group of people had to have their rights to be able to vote enshrined as a constitutional amendment in order to make that in order to make that a reality. And the simple fact that we have a tiered system of justice here based on class and based on education, where like if you have like, a young middle-aged white kid who gets caught smoking pot and a young lower class person of color gets caught smoking pot, you can assume we all assume, right? We make assumptions about people all the time about what they do and what they don't do, right? We we make especially people of color much older and more mature than they should be. We excuse behavior for certain kids and not for others. But I really feel in terms of like legal justice for all, I mean, I think I think it does exist. I think for a lot of people it's practically out of reach, right?
Hmm.
It costs too much money. It requires asking for too much power that probably will not be given to you. It requires that you be seen in a way that most people in this country are not seen, because we are a country that obsesses about a small number of people. People who are very talented at sports, people who look beautiful on camera, people who have won the popularity contest to be elected to represent the people of their area. Um, And I think in elevating those people to positions of power, we have allowed other people to believe that they are powerless. Um,
That powerlessness is on full display from the victims of the Epstein debacle. And,
yeah, and
and it
it's
seems
weird.
like
It
their
used
power
to be
back.
there were
It seems like they're getting their power back by getting together and raising hell, which is what they have done recently. And luckily, there's been enough media coverage to assist with that.
yeah. It seems like, and I'm not trying to be cynical about this, right? Because cynicism, of course, is a way of abdicating your more moral responsibility to speak truth to power, right? Like cynicism is really facetious, right? Because you can think like, oh yeah, I see the Matrix and I understand it's all just a game or it's all nonsense. And that allows you to be smug and to do nothing. But I feel like in terms of like people who are powerless, it used to be that we had a couple of people who universally we could rally behind, right? And that was usually animals and victims of sexual abuse, like children, right? And and specifically, especially if it was like a white female, right? I mean, there are many thousands of people who go missing every year, but the people who normally get our attention are the younger white females. And you would think that like with such a huge ring and with people on the right especially being really finely attuned in their outrage meter to like evidence of pedophile rings by powerful people, right? That there would be this idea of a desire for justice. I don't think anybody is trying to call into question their desire for the need for justice for these victims. But I feel like I feel like there's just too much of a veil protecting those who would be brought to justice, that it feels like it's just too heavy of a lift to get these victims the justice that they deserve. And it's
Because
actually really,
it's more important to protect the perpetrators.
yeah, I also think it calls into account for as cynical, as Americans can be, we are actually very naive about one thing, and that we are usually really trusting and really giving the benefit of the doubt to our presidents and our people in positions of power. I think a lot of it because like we are we are good about giving people second acts. We are good at the moralistic idea of forgiving someone, that someone is not, their worst act. But I think we tend to give a lot of deference to people in positions of political power, which is why like we've never been able to like impeach a president, which is why we've really never been able to like even redress huge national grievances like slavery in a realistic and clear way without like either panicking or feeling that it would like tear the country apart. And it's interesting that like we have to look for our moral compass in other countries, right? In places like Brazil that punished their former president for staging a very January 6th like coup against the government. The former president of South Korea was just remanded to life in prison for fomenting a coup and a revolution against his own people. And those kinds of things that go unpunished are usually go done in places that have abysmal human rights records, right? Like places like China or North Korea, or in places like Sudan, where you execute your enemies or even your potential enemies, and nothing really happens to you, and you create a climate of fear and fear and surrender and resignation. So yeah, I feel like, as Americans, we need to get over our reverence of the presidency, but also in a way that doesn't like either like that doesn't descend into violence. Right? We have to have a belief that the system that should work, and that no one is above the law. But unfortunately, people tend to take that to its most like, violent, jingoistic, you know, Second Amendment absolutist extremes.
How likely do you think it would be? I guess I'm going to ask for a percentage of the fear of it descending into violence. What's the likelihood in your mind that it will or won't?
Um,
Because
I don't
January
know.
6th was violent. January 6th was a violent day.
Oh no, it was a very violent day. But I again, like as Americans, we can just say like, oh, that happened over there. And I'm not that person, or like in places like Los Angeles or Maine or North Carolina before Minneapolis. Like, oh yeah, no, they're going after people that I don't like, and I'm fine with a little. I'm fine with going outside the bounds of the law in order to get rid of these terrible people. I think what's going to happen is especially when these ICE agents come into communities and you get to see for yourself what is happening in your neighborhood, in your city, that's when I think people are going to recoil from this, right? And not just in the like, I didn't think it would happen to like, to the chef at like my Mexican restaurant or that sort of thing. I just thought they were going after the bad guys. I think I think especially when people who are, who especially were looking to have their economic problems solved, see what is really going on in their name, the scales will probably fall from their eyes if we give people the space to admit to themselves and therefore to other people that they were wrong, or like
If
they
they're
made a mistake.
willing, I mean, we could give them the space. I think there's plenty of space now, but you still have to be willing to admit that you were wrong.
Yeah, but I think like when you see like these sorts of things happening in your neighborhood and it's in your face, suddenly it's not trolling anymore. Suddenly it is like very, very real. Um, and hopefully you can, uh, call people to their own moral compass, or at least to remember what their moral compass is.
Or to explain the morality that is in that compass. Because a lot of times the morality in their mind is just going to church every Sunday, and that's all they need to do. And the rest of their bigotry can just be justified because they can just blow it away by the fact that they go to church every Sunday.
Yeah. Also, the fact that most people are just desperately trying to get by, and therefore they don't have a whole lot of bandwidth for like national politics or the way their government works or anything like that because they're working like two jobs and they
That's
and,
another big
and they're
factor.
completely exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lenny, this has been a wonderful conversation. I so much enjoy our backyard uh, conversations about the world that you and I have, and we don't have enough of them, but we don't have a lot of time for them. But I do enjoy that, and I want to thank you so much for joining this particular format and allowing us and the viewers to have a sense of your wisdom and all that it teaches us.
No, this is great because, all of us have opinions, right? And that's
Uh-huh.
great. Hopefully all of us, actually then are able to take the time to think like, well, what is my opinion? How do I feel about this instead of like, what am I being told to feel about this? Um,
And I
so
think
for
it's a good
me,
opportunity to articulate that, to actually get a better sense of what that opinion is and what its foundation is.
yeah, and I think that kind of internal questioning is good. And if you can, with your neighbor, right, or with even someone you disagree with, get somebody to really try to explain to you what they mean, I think they start asking questions for themselves. Like, what do you mean by just getting rid of all of these illegals? What does that look like to you? And what would that do to our neighborhood? What would that do to our city? What do you see as the end result of this? It also gently, right? If you are curious about their views, hopefully then they get to be curious about their views and they actually get to think beyond uh just the immediate thing that they've like, seen in an Instagram post or a TikTok video or on an opinion show, right? An
So
opinion
let
news
me
show.
ask you this practical question: do you ever get in any conversations with people of that ilk that you just described? People who want to who believe that we should get rid of all the illegals. Have you encountered anybody in your socialized interactions?
Yeah, and I feel like the way to go about it is almost like in a judo match, right? It's not to declare your opposition, it's to just ask them to explain themselves in a curious way, not in an accusatory way. And then it usually one, it disarms people, right? Because they're ready for a war or a confrontation or a fight. And if you show up actually curious about what they think, right, it allows them to just kind of to explain, and you say, okay. Um, and sometimes you can go into the disagreement from there, but it allows them to like to be able to like to kind of say their piece. And
So, do
maybe
these
they're
conversations occur often with you?
not as much as I would like, right? Again, like I'm, a huge hypocrite, right? Like I have a circle of like highly intelligent, mostly progressive friends, but like you know, we all encounter people who are hopefully who are not like us in small areas, right? I myself am a bit of a can be a bit of a talker or a little too gregarious, according to my wife. Like so, like even talking to someone like in the supermarket, or like when you have to like be with someone, say like in a tiny little waiting room area, like at your local like car repair place, or even at the library, or at any other place where you run into somebody in public, stranger or friend or whatever. Sometimes it's just good, yeah, to have, and again to have other people like explain what their thinking is. It forces them to actually say it, as opposed to like just feel like they're in combat with you, as opposed to saying like, well, I'm right and you're wrong. You ask them like, well, what do you really think about this, and not say whether it's right or wrong. And sometimes you find ways of maybe finding an intersection where like, yeah, I believe that that we need to have border enforcement or like, yeah, I really, I don't think that the Second Amendment is going anywhere because we've had centuries of hunting culture. I play in a symphony up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I have lots of interactions with people who I would not, go out for dinner with or anything like that. But like, just, even like being able to see the way somebody lives and not judge it is sometimes the opening that you need.
Hmm. Yeah. I think also the waiting room in the car repair place would be a good environment for that kind of conversation to get started at.
It
Um,
is.
and
It
Altoona,
is. And I,
I'm from the Altoona area. I grew up in the Altoona area, and I know exactly what you're talking about the people up there too.
yeah. I mean, and I usually tell like any of my, more progressive friends, I was like, the best thing you can do to change hearts and minds is to know a little bit about sports.
Well, I'm with that. All right, Lenny, thank you so much. And
Sure.
see you around the neighborhood.
No, it was great. It was great hanging out with you, Paul. Really great questions. You're obviously like a real passionate guy, and hopefully I didn't throw cold water on all of your piss and vinegar here tonight.
It's not about agreeing about everything. It's about the dialogue and what we can the transcend from the disagreement. Like who was it? Hegel. Hegel's dialectic. I'm sure you remember that, where you have the thesis, antithesis, and what you
Yes.
end up with is that synthesis.
Synthesis.
And that's what it's all about, getting to that synthesis. So
Yeah.
thanks again for coming by, and we'll see you around the neighborhood. And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening. Until next time, bye now.